All right, I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole meeting for January 12th to order and ask the Director to proceed with roll call. Is there a problem?
Yes, I've lost connection. Here, just a second.
No, I'll do the roll call while you find connection.
Okay, we're
Trustee McRae.
good.
Trustee McPherson.
Present.
Trustee Richards.
Present.
Trustee McAllister.
Present.
Trustee McMillan.
Present.
Trustee Swan.
Present.
Chair Petersman.
Present.
Trustee McDonald.
Present.
Trustee Buckland.
Present.
Trustee Karkner.
Present.
Regrets Trustee Garrow and Student Trustee Castle.
Present.
Okay, move now to the approval of the agenda. Just a note that our presenter for the War of 1812 bicentennial presentation is ill and is not able to join us tonight, and we'll reschedule that as soon as she is able to attend. So there's just one change then. I have a motion to approve the agenda. Trustee McRae, Trustee McDonald, all in favor? Opposed? That carries. Any declarations of conflict of interest? All right, seeing none, I'll move on now to report from private session, January 12, 2011. Just a note that one property matter was discussed in private session committee of the whole this evening, and a motion was brought forward to the next board meeting, January 26, 2011, in public session. Move now on to the approval of the minutes. This is for the regular meeting, November 10th. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll look for approval of the minutes. Moved by Trustee McPherson, seconded by Trustee Richards. All in favor? Opposed? That carries.
Just a point of interest to our trustees, and this just comes from my 78-year-old mother in London, Ontario, who's watching. You cannot hear you speak when you cover up your microphone, so you could have something quite eloquent to say at either any end of the table, and then you should pull your microphone down so it can be heard. They're all live, but to some of you, when Rick begins to speak, who's not here right now, he's hardly audible sometimes when he doesn't have his mic. But if you're going to be speaking, if you could just push your, that's just to help the viewers at home, and there are viewers at home, you may be wondering.
Has Mother been hired as a consultant?
She'd like to work and tell you a thing or two, she's told me.
All right, thank you very much, Director, for that little bit of advice. That's very useful.
Those years at TSN have finally paid off.
Are we getting makeup advice for television next month? All right, we'll now look at move now to our report on the 2010-2011 revised estimates. We have Rick Gales, and he has a team here that he's going to invite up. I will turn the table over. He was here.
Coming in.
I was just introducing you and indicating that you will introduce your team. The floor is yours, Mr. Gales.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This evening I've asked Nancy Barkley and Michael Law to join us at the table. The purpose of the report this evening is to bring to the trusteeship the revised estimates for 2010-2011. And I recognize that this is a confusing piece for new trustees. And so I think we'll do a couple of things. We'll take our time going through this, and we'll also at some point have a tutorial. We'll organize a tutorial to help you along at a later time. And so if Lisa could get that slideshow going, we'll get started. The first thing, don't be confused by the term revised estimate. What that is an update. It's a financial forecast. And the first thing you need to remember is that our fiscal year begins September 1st and ends the following August 31st. So what you have now in front of you is a forecast for the current budget year that we are in. So it started last September and it will go through to next August. And so the first slide that we have is an overall slide to take a look at. And it has two series of columns. Those on the left refer to the previous fiscal year, 2009-2010, and that's the period that began September 1, 2009, and ended last August 31st, 2010. And what it shows is that at the beginning of 2009, the board sat with a reserve, if you like, what at that time was called a working fund reserve, and now has a surplus available for compliance unappropriated. That's its new terminology. It was called working fund reserves. During the year 2009-2010, we added to that with an in-year surplus of $1.6 million. And so on August 31st, 2010, the board sat with a working fund reserves, which at that point became accumulated surplus available for compliance unappropriated of $3.1 million. The second series of columns is a forecast for the 12 months beginning September 1, 2010, ending August 31, 2011. And it shows the beginning balance of 3.1. It shows that there is going to be, at this point, it's projected, a 0.6 or $600,000, and I think the number is $637,245 deficit. And so at the end of 2011, which will be August 31st, 2011, we are forecasting an accumulated surplus available for compliance which has not been appropriated, in other words, the old working fund reserves, of $2.5 million. So that was the big picture to show you what our current financial forecast is for the year. So now let's get into a few specifics. In the documents that we sent out, we provided a number of appendices. And the first appendix, well, actually, all of the appendices are based on the same sort of format. They have a row number. They have a description. They have a column called Original Budget. Then they have column 2, which is the Revised Budget. And then there is columns 3 and 4, and column 3 shows the numerical change, and column 4 shows the percentage change. Pardon me. For most of the lines where there is a significant change and the change can be explained, we have tried to do so. And Michael and Nancy are here. Should there be questions, Mr. Chair, that we'll try to answer, should they not, the explanations that have been provided not be sufficient, or if there's further discussion or questions as a result. On this first piece, what is being shown is that the projected enrollment that was provided in the original budget last June, July, in elementary was 16,520 students on an average daily enrollment basis, which is simply a way of saying a full-time equivalent basis. The revised estimate shows the projection now is that during the 2010-2011 year, we will have 16,635 students, or an increase of 115 over the original plan. Secondary shows a decrease of 7, and other enrollment shows an increase of 75. So if we go down one slide, you will see the same format, different line numbers, different descriptions, and obviously different values. And these are the different kinds of grants that are available to the board from the ministry. And so these are the operating grant allocations from the ministry. There are a series of adjustments. I wasn't necessarily going to get into the numbers unless there are specific questions. I was simply going to indicate what those numbers are in the original and in the revised estimates in our new forecast. And so column 1 is the original forecast. Column 2 is the revised forecast as a result of that revised enrollment or other things that have changed in the last 6 months, last 8 months really. And then the numerical change and the percentage change. And so for the first several slides, for all of Appendix A, we are talking about revenue and grants to the board.
Trustee McAllister, you have a question?
Yes, I do. When there is a leeway in enrollment projection, or pardon me, I'll try that again. When there's a variance between the actual enrollment and the projected enrollment, is there a leeway from the ministry for that, or is it actual?
Could you explain what you mean by the term leeway?
Well, in this case, the elementary ADE is exceeded by 115, correct?
Yes.
Let's assume that it was down by 115. Would we be funded less, or is there any kind of tolerance from the ministry?
I see. Perhaps we could go back to that slide. Most of those grants, and I think about 80 some odd % of our revenue from the ministry is based on enrollment. So that as enrollment varies, our grants will vary. There are only a couple that are based on things other than direct enrollment. So, pardon me, principals and vice principals called school administration. I wonder which line that is now. 16. Which one? School Foundation. Oh, School Foundation. That's the name of it. Okay, line number 5. That line is based on essentially the number of buildings that you have open and a factor for enrollment combined. Other than that, the vast majority of our grants are based on enrollment. So as enrollment declines, even during the year, you will be based on that revised number. So if our enrollment were 115 elementary students less rather than more, those grants would all be negatively impacted.
Thank you.
Do you have a comment, Trustee McPherson?
Just going back in history, wasn't that many years ago where we did have a substantial drop from the anticipated to the actual, and we were actually looking at an entirely different scenario that night. It was going the other way.
Trustee Karkner?
Through you to Mr. Gales, what date does the ministry use for their recording of the enrollment for a school year?
There are two specific dates that are used: August 31st and March 30. October 31st and March 31st. And each of those dates counts as a half. So if someone were there taking a full load in high school for that full school year, it would be considered a half a student on October 31st and the other half on March 31st. So if we lose enrollment during the year, as we often do in secondary, in the final years, our enrollment in the second semester is less, and our grants are less.
Trustee Castleman?
I have a question for Mr. Gales. When you were saying that the grants decline based on enrollment, did the grants decline only for students affected by that particular grant? So, for example, there's one in line 20, First Nation, Métis, and Inuit Education Supplemental Allocation Grant. So would that grant decline only if we saw a decline in the students affected by that grant, or just a decline based on the overall student population?
It's generally based on the overall student population, depending on the specific grant. And some are very complicated formulas, but essentially, for the most part, they're based on the overall population.
Trustee McRae?
Well, the line, when you talk about looking at the operating grants, what's really sticks out at me is line 22E. Can you bring that to light a little bit for us? 22E, deduct transfer of operating revenue relating to minor TCA.
TCA stands for Tangible Capital Assets, and I'm going to get myself into trouble here, and Michael is going to bail me out. I'm going to call him Nancy, you're going to bail me out. Basically, a lot of the changes that we have had this year in the reporting is surrounding capital, and these are all adjustments made to adjust for those changes. And at that point, I'm going to turn to Michael and Nancy and ask.
Before you do that, Superintendent Gales, why don't you give them a little context in terms of what the ministry has been doing over the last number of years and why we're seeing so many changes to our statements, just to give it a little context, or maybe somebody else.
I think that the best answer is going to come from Nancy and Michael.
Okay. Give us some context in terms of the history of why these changes have been coming forward so that they understand, that the new trustees understand where it's coming from.
Historically, school boards have been based on what's called a modified cash basis of funding and accounting, which really means as the cash comes in and if you spend it, you record it as an expense, and that affects your bottom line. School boards have been required by the CICA, the Canadian Institute of Chartered Accountants, through the branch of the public public sector accounting board, to now move to what is called an accrual basis of accounting. So what that means is, as you incur expenses, yes, you still record them as expenses, but one of the big changes is when you build a new school, you buy the furniture for this room, whereas in the past you would expense it in the year that the cash went out to do that. Now you have to capitalize the asset. And so it's not recorded as an expense. So in the case of the school, the useful life is estimated to be about 40 years. So the value of that school is expensed over the next 40 years. So that's one of the major changes that you'll see. So the expenses are now true expenses and not strictly cash. Other changes related to that, the ministry as well would flow funds to us to make our payments on our debentures, so both principal and interest payments. And that was always in year, the amount we would receive, we would pay out. Now we still get the cash to make those payments, but the accounting is different in that back when the financial statements were presented, those of you who were here saw that we set up what's called an accounts receivable from the ministry for the principal portion of the debt that we hold on our balance sheet. And so then we draw that down in the future as we make our principal payments, which is the accounting side of it. The cash still comes from the ministry annually to make our cash payments. for the supported debt, and that's a whole other part of the equation. The other change that's significant for us in terms of managing our budget is that whereas in the past, and Rick talked about reserves for working funds, we had other reserves and other funds. We were able to shift dollars between operating expenses, capital expenses, put money into reserves to plan. And that really was done before the bottom line number fell out the bottom. That has changed in that the funds are gone. There are more restrictions in terms of the capital funds come in, they must be spent on capital, for the most part. The operating funds must be spent on operating. Everything is thrown together, really, all in one pot, and the total revenue minus the total expenses, you come to a bottom line. Then, and Rick is going to show you a schedule later that will maybe help explain this, then you can allocate some of that surplus, hopefully, accumulated surplus, among different categories to plan for future expenses. So that part of it is more presentation, and it's also related to compliance. Another significant change is compliance, which is not really an accounting thing. That's a ministry decision that we have to, there are different parameters, and Rick will probably get into that, but basically the 1% rule, and you need to stay within that 1% in terms of any in-year deficit. That's kind of a high level. Okay. So if I could just carry on to the minor tangible capital asset question. Mm-hmm. The funding for minor tangible capital assets now each year will be based on 2.5%, that's a ministry decision, of our operating allocation. We may choose, though, that's one of those pots, we may choose to spend part of it on capital, part of it on operating, all of it on capital, all of it on operating. So that portion that you see, the $4 million or so, is what we plan or we project that we will actually spend on assets that will be capitalized in our books.
Does that help?
Well, basically, at the bottom line on the revised budget, it says we basically have more grants. We'll be getting more grants than we anticipated. Right?
Let's go to the next slide.
Yeah, I have a question from Trustee McPherson before we get to that, please.
Yeah, before you get off this one, item line number 6. Can you explain why we've actually had a reduction in the spec ed funding? I realize it's now SEPA, student-based, and I'm just curious with the reflection of the increase in enrollment, unless of course that's reflecting the decrease in the secondary, I guess.
Is that seal?
That would probably involve an increase in the high needs amount. We had projected about $500,000, almost $600,000, I believe. SIP application revenue from the ministry that has decreased probably over $300,000 due to tighter reporting requirements and eligibility rules. I'm not certain of the rule changes. Susan and her group are more accustomed to those particular requirements and whatnot, but that's pretty much the biggest change in the spec ed area.
And that's the same line that we got the big hit in last year.
Yes.
And what is that high needs amount used for?
That high needs amount is used for basically staffing, support such as teachers and EAs and other support staff within the special education environment.
Okay, thank you. Trustee McAllister?
Through your chair to Nancy. I just want to see if I understand this correctly. Dealing with 22E. What we're doing here, is it not taking a portion of our capitalization as it occurs from our operating expenses as we progress?
In the ministry forms, the tangible capital assets firstly are part of the operating grants, yes. And then we take 2.5%, carve that away as potentially or available to be used to purchase assets that we will capitalize. Then what Michael has done here, these numbers, he's projected based on the different departments' revised budgets, how much of their allocation they will capitalize, how much will remain as an operating expense. And so this right now predicts that kind of distribution or use of the funds.
So as we build a new school, for example, that figure would go up.
This line is strictly, 22E is strictly minor tangible capital assets, so things like furniture and equipment that meet the capitalization threshold, which is typically $5,000.
Okay.
When we build a school, the complete cost is capitalized.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Superintendent Gales.
So if we go on to the balance of Appendix A, you'll see some of the other revenue that comes in. For example, line 23, while we projected other provincial grants of 23 million, 4.6 million, those are now 6.6 million, and you can see some of the changes in the grants and other forms of revenue as we go through the year. You'll also see that we are now required to report on line 28 school-generated funds. So funds that school councils, student councils, and others raise during the year for through hot dog sales, I think is our favorite one, etc., now are required to be reported on our financial statements, and so you can see those in there as well. The final total shows that the projected revenue has gone up, according to this statement, by $5 million, 1.5%.
Trustee McPherson?
So, if I'm reading what you just said properly, we have to account for a $109,000 decrease in the sale of hot dogs in our budget. Is that what the ministry is telling us?
That's what the forms are telling you.
I have to admit, I've never seen line 28 before.
No, you won't have. You would not have seen line 28 before.
To me, that is, well, I call it nitpicking, but I'm sure my school councils would be glad to know that I'm going to go back and tell them they better up the sales or we're going to be running a deficit there. So.
No, I think that you needn't worry about that. We'll account for that on Schedule 5, as you'll see later. But it does show you and bring to light the amount of money that is raised in the schools and the reason why we have talented staff looking after it. And David referred to the unqualified audit last year, of which previously had been qualified because of that line and is no longer because of the work of staff in schools and Tracy and Joanne.
Trustee McAllister?
With regard to the school-generated funds, this is a reporting issue, I assume, and has nothing to do with the way school councils spend their funds or raise their funds or whatever. In other words, they are not impacted on this.
Not directly, no.
Okay, thank you.
The biggest change was for how they would account for money and who helps them with that. That was a big change through the changes through PSAP, but it doesn't change how they spend it. Trustee Castleman?
Just a comment on line 28. This was actually an issue that was brought up at the last OSTA meeting. We were discussing it in detail, and the reason that was some of the reasons that it's brought up is because in the past there has been significant misuse in funds. For example, there was a principal in Etobicoke that it's had siphoned off $90,000 of school-generated funds from their high school, and that's why this is so important that we're doing this now, so that that money is now accounted for, and people are assured that when they give money to their school, that it's actually used for school purposes.
Trustee McMillan.
I think that the schools in the next year or two are going to find it much more difficult to raise those kind of funds in light of the fact that a lot of those monies are obtained through the selling of food. And I believe the government has tightened that up to the point that hot dogs and things like that are going to be restricted from the schools. And as a result, I think it's going to be much more difficult for them to raise those kind of funds. So I think we'll see that significantly less over the next year or two.
Go ahead. Thank you.
If there are no further questions on revenue, we could move to expense.
Just a comment for our trustees new to this board. KPMG at our internal audit function came back and unqualified. One of the areas they were most impressed with was the audit function within our schools. We have internal audit function with Tracy, who goes to the schools and does just that. Did the hot dog money get to where it was supposed to go? And what I was very pleased with this particular third-party audit from the KPMG was that they have never seen that before, an unqualified audit where they could say, we think you can account for every hot dog. Now, I'm not sure if we can sell too many hot dogs anymore, but at this particular time, I think for the public, they should feel very confident that the principals, office administrators, the teachers in their schools, the EAs are all paying close attention to the taxpayers' money that comes in through little Sally or Bobby who come to school to buy their pizza, whatever. I think that was a great news story. Too bad it was lost, but I think the 100 or so schools should have real confidence in what our secretaries, our principals, and teachers are doing in their schools.
Carry on, Lieutenant Gales.
Moving on to Appendix B. When you have a $350 million budget, the urge is to break it up into $5 amounts. Well, that would be an awful lot of amounts. So what is the right kind of breaking up of those monies? Essentially, we're following here the reporting mechanism to the ministry. It also resembles, to a certain extent, the reporting mechanism that you will see on a monthly basis. There are far more detailed reports, obviously, in the system. And one of the things that we're working on is a redrafting and a reformatting of all of these, of all of our approaches to reporting the accounting. But this is consistent with our approach to reporting expenses now, consistent with previous years to a certain extent until we get to the bottom. So what you have here on lines 1 through 13 are the traditional reporting in terms of classroom teachers, classroom expenses, supply teachers, teacher assistants, etc. And again, you have the original budget and you have the revised budget and the difference. And you can see there has been an increase in the three major areas, of course, classroom teachers, supply teachers, teaching assistants, and textbook classroom supplies, etc. Basically, there were explanations provided for each of these lines in your report, and helped clarify some of the issues as we go forward. In terms of lines 14 through 18, those are generally considered non-classroom, non-school-based expenditures, so you have admin and governance, and that includes essentially this building and trustees, transportation on line 15, school operations and maintenance is the operation and maintenance of facilities, so all of the school buildings. This building, the physical cost of this building is charged to line 14, admin and governance. So line 16 are essentially school buildings. 17 is line 17 is school renewal, and that is for the most part minor repair, not minor repairs, but project repairs of buildings, and as we go down, there are some other non-operating expenditures and amortization means of debentures, the principal payment of debentures. And you can see that the expenditures show an increase. And we'll keep going to the next slide then. Again, line 21 offsets line 28 from the previous page, school generated funds. There's a series of other PSAB type adjustments that are required under the accounting rules that Nancy referred to earlier. And then there are all of the capital activities that Nancy alluded to earlier, but essentially lines 23 through 30. We're going to jump now to Appendix D. It always is an area that this board has looked at, and that's special education. And essentially the beginning, this slide in Appendix D shows the grant revenue for special education. And you can see there's been an increase of $1 million above the original projection for spec ed. And what you'll see also is an increase pardon me, in the expenditures. This cold is starting to get to me. And you can see that there is an increase in the expenditures. The significant areas, of course, line 10, teaching assistants, will go up and are going to essentially cause a deficit in special education this year. The line 11 is basically SIA equipment, and those are money in, money out through grants from the ministry, with the exception of the first $800 of each of the purchases, which is paid for by the board. And so if we go to the next slide, you'll see that we are projecting an in-year deficit in special education of $475,000. For 2010, 2011 at this point. Now this is Appendix C, is the consolidated statement of operations, revenue less expense comparison. And I'm just going to indicate that this is just a summary of what we've seen before, and ask you to look at the very bottom line, total in-year surplus deficit, where it says $4,381,000, and just sort of keep your thumb there as we go forward, or keep that number in your minds. And this is where Michael or Nancy referred to as this whole thing comes together. You'll see how this unfolds. So I think the next slide will be Appendix E, which is basically a copy of a sheet directly from the revised estimates. And it's called Schedule 5. And it's the detail of accumulated surplus deficit projected for this year ending August 31st, 2011. Pardon me. You'll see the various descriptors down the left-hand side, along with the lines that are numbered. You'll see the balance at September 1, 2010. And there's another column called Change in Accounting Policy. And so there is a recognition that there is a change in the way we're doing the accounting in 2011. And so this is the adjusted balance at September 1, 2010. And then the next column is the in-year increase or decrease. And then there's the balance, the projected balance at August 31st, 2011. So you can see on line 1.1, operating accumulated surplus, previously referred to by us as working funds. And you can see that they are going to decrease by $637,000, and we are going to have, at the end of the year, if this forecast is completely accurate, a operating accumulated surplus of $2.5 million. So let's go to the, pardon me, I apologize. These are all different classifications of amounts in our accumulated surplus deficit. I've got one going, thank you. Two might be better. Apologize. So line 2.1, for example, is...
Carol, there's room over here.
It's the talking that is causing my throat to dry. I apologize. 2.1 is the retirement gratuities that have been set aside through a collective agreement for QP employees. Line 2.2 is a reserve for WSIB, Workplace Safety Insurance Board requirements. Line 2.4 are essentially classroom or school budgets, and traditionally schools carry forward surpluses and deficits annually, and that shows the amount in play during the year. Line 2.5 is the SIA training, that's the special education equipment. Thank you. And what it shows is a drawdown this year of $60,000, reducing that amount. Line 2.6 is the reserve that the board set aside for the transportation consortium. Line 2.9, called equipment, is the amount, I believe, that we have set aside as a result of renting space in Rothwell Osnabrück to the community. Line 2.1 is, and that's probably 2.10, is called the CUP 7 computer project. And what that is every year we have been putting aside $900,000 to $1 million for computer purchases. And the project now is in a place where during 2010-11 we're projecting buying $2 or $3 million worth of computer and computer-related equipment to roll out into the schools starting in September. So what you're seeing here is that the board has saved money to buy these computers for schools and will now roll it out through Jeremy's. And so if we go to the next slide, you'll see that on line 3, it's called the total accumulated surplus available for compliance. And you're seeing that that is going down by $2.5 million. The interesting thing about that line is that that is the ministry's measuring point for deficits, if you like. If we go back one slide, I would say that the measuring point would be, actually go back one more slide, would be that line 1.3. In other words, everything below 1.3 to 3.0, line 3.0, are things that we control, but go down one, please. Those are monies that we have set aside for specific functions. So line 2.1, we put away money to spend on computers, and we'll spend that by taking that money out of that account, buy computers, but the ministry wants to measure that and say that's part of that's one of the lines we're going to look at in terms of compliance or non-compliance with their 1%. And so if you use their line, go forward please, 3.0, then that would put us pretty close to 1%. But I think that that doesn't make sense, and I think when the government sees that, or the ministry staff see that, they will agree that that doesn't make sense. No, back. Okay. This, now, remember a moment ago I said, put your finger on that minus 4.3. Well, here it is on line 5. Now, how do we come to that number? Well, on line 3, you've got the minus 2.5 million I spoke about. And now you talk about amounts that are unavailable for compliance. So, employee future benefits. What they've made us account for and put in our statement is the future cost of retirement gratuities and other benefits for employees that are working for us. So all of the current teachers, if all of a sudden magically overnight all got to retirement age and the board magically was required to pay out retirement gratuities all at one time for those people, at the end of August that cost would be $52 million. That's what they're accounting for. Interest, and Nancy referred to that earlier, is interest on ventures, and that's a real cost. 4.3 is vacation accrued for the most part. That is QP staff and administrative staff that have different timelines for vacations, and so they have to be accounted for at August 31st. Line 4.4 is school-generated funds. The line 4.5 is the net tangible capital assets, and that is the amount that the government is adjusting based on having put it in our statements last year. So as we go down to the bottom line on line 5, the ministry's method of accounting for this says that we really have a deficit of 4.3 million. However, the amount we really have is 637. So if an inexperienced ministry person were to look at our statements and this statement and misinterpret it, you would get the wrong answer on what our surplus or deficit really is.
Trustee McAllister?
I think you've touched on it, Rick, but can you explain to me why line 2.1 segregates the QP retirement gratuity liability from 4.8 for everybody else?
And perhaps I've misquoted. The amount on line 2.1 is amounts that the board has actually put aside according to the collective agreement for QP retirement gratuities. And Michael could confirm that I believe that the real cost would be on line 4.1. Is that true?
The amount under 4.1 are for people that have either a predecessor board or a non-QE retirement gratuity allowance. The line 2.1 refers to what is outstanding for members of the
Oh, you're right. Okay. That's the amount we have put aside for QP members that they're entitled to. There isn't a plan similar to teachers for QP.
Trustee Carpenter?
Question about 2.14. It seems like a big chunk of change there, and can you just explain what's in that 7 million? It's not in the...
Pardon me, yes. if we start at the top at 2.1, that's line 2.1, because line 2.14, I believe, is a total of the numbers above it. So 2.1 is the retirement gratuities for CUPE. 2.2 is on deposit as a safety net for WSIB. 2.4 is classroom, etc., CU training, etc. Now, these are what's called available for compliance, internally appropriated. In other words, the board designated these amounts to be appropriated for specific issues. 2.1, the retirement gratuities for CUPE by the collective agreement. 2.1, below that, or 2.10, CUP 7 computer rollout is an approach the board takes to rolling out a large number of computers every 2 or 3 years in line with its strategic plan. And so what that is a total of funds that have been designated by the board. Okay. So rolling forward, we took a look at some of the variance factors, some of the things that drive change in our world, our financial world. And so enrollment, well, what's the impact of a change in enrollment? And Trustee McAllister referred to this earlier. What's the impact of some of those changes? Well, in elementary, that was divided between JK to 3 because there are different rates because of the class size, because of the grants for that, and the 4 to 8. And you can see the impact of that change is $530,000. On the secondary, there's a misprint, the minus, that should be a minus 21,000 as a result of those 7 students. In terms of what's happened in staffing, our plan last June was to have 1,008, almost 1,009 elementary teachers. By the time we met class size requirements, we had to add another 8.5 teachers in the elementary panel this fall, and in secondary we added another 14.8 in order to meet class cap requirements and student needs. And there could be a whole longer discussion on that than I'm capable of providing for you. In terms of average cost, one of the things that Michael has to do is project where on the grid our teachers will be the next year. And depending on seniority and retirements, declining enrollment, that demographic picture can change quite radically. It's quite difficult to get it quite right. In the elementary change, the grid gave us a cost of $88,140 per teacher on average, salary and benefits, and that would have been $390 per teacher less than we had projected. Secondary teacher, you can see that we had over-projected by $1,376. So we go to the next slide, please. In terms of EA staffing, we had projected 220 in elementary, 93 in secondary, and our revised plan shows us up by 15 EAs between last June and our fall rollout. In terms of the cost of EAs, we had projected a cost of $41,000, and we had understated that by $185,000. It's going to cost probably, our projection at this point, $41,000, almost $800 per EA for a 10-month year. And those were the final slides that we want to bring to your attention this evening.
I'd like to go back to the very first slide, which I don't think we have in our package, the one with the graphs, the bar graphs, with dealing with the working fund reserves. Is there, are there any constraints from the ministry on the amount of dollars that we can keep in a working fund reserve?
I don't believe that I'm not aware of an upper limit. Their annual request is that we do not have a deficit of more than 1%. If we see a deficit coming, we are to communicate with them. But that is in a B memo. It's not in a regulation. So I think it would be at one point last year, a senior ministry bureaucrat misread the financial statements of the entire province and told all of the directors and the superintendents of the business that there was this enormous surplus within school boards. But as you can see from the Schedule 5, that surplus is specific to collective agreements, to WSIB requirements, it's school-generated funds, and the amount that we have really $2.5 million on a $250 million budget is less than 1%. And at the need to hire a couple of teachers here or there or something that could happen, boilers, roofs, it's not a great deal of money to have in your side pocket for a rainy day or for an issue, a project, a plan, something that needs to go forward.
You know that while they've never told us what the upper limit is, that how many years ago? 7 years ago, they came in and took $10 million out. They rated 3 school boards, 4 school boards. So it's one of those things that you don't want allowed to get too high for fear that they do that again. But they can be act arbitrarily, and this board knows the impact of that all too well. So, although they've never stipulated what that number is, or Trustee McPherson.
Under your EA staffing change, you've got a bullet there. Regular school-based staff only excludes speech language assistants, etc., etc. Those are support workers that you've mentioned there. Any indication of the increase in other levels of school support besides the EA allocations? I know a couple of my schools have had non-EA support put in, and I was just curious as what impact overall we had on the board.
At one point during the original plan, the board was going to reduce the number of ISMs supervised students in elementary sector. That occurred. The level has been maintained for the second semester. I think the number is ISMs. How many?
We've added $540,000 for ISMs.
For the second semester. We had originally budgeted $500,000. We knew that the annual cost was closer to $1 million. Budget plan was to reduce that. It couldn't be done, wasn't done. So that supervision has been maintained.
Trustee McDonald?
A couple of questions. Going back, I think it's between schedule, is it F? Sorry, Appendix F and Appendix D. EA staffing change, we've got an increase of 16 EAs, but with Appendix D, we're looking at think this is D.
$600,000 increase, is that?
Yeah, that's not B, D. Yeah, 637 or whatever the number was.
Yeah, that would have been on Appendix D, I believe.
685, sorry. Going back 6 months or so, we were faced with a crucial issue, I guess, and the concern was how are we going to be serving students? Are we serving students effectively? We've got an increase of 16. Is that meeting the needs of our special needs students?
I anticipated that I might have that type of question, and I have a couple of slides perhaps to take you through that. David, this is a question you're looking at for the quality of special ed. How's it impacted?
Yes.
Please, could you put those slides that I prepared? Through you, Chair Petersman. I've had a number of parents contact my office, and I know our Superintendent Edwards has had the same, and I believe that both David and Linda have had the same, that there's a concern or a perception that the EA assignments and alignment are not up to the level of it really. And I've taken a real look at this to answer individual parents' questions. And even this morning at Perth, at a really good session, I had a parent pull me aside to ask me about this, because there's a growing number of people who are talking to one another about that. And I just want to, for the record, put that out to answer your question. But there are parents asking the same. I had an RO parent the same this afternoon talk with me as well. I've got a slide to show you here about special education student achievement in the province. I think Associate Director Carswell is probably perhaps the most proud of this one. It certainly reflects a great deal of his work when he was Superintendent of Special Services. The blue line, as you can see, are the results of the Upper Canada District School Board based upon the EQAO. These are special needs students. And the other one represents the province. As you can see there, that we are significantly above the province, and actually as the province improves, we're improving at a greater rate than they are. And over the last 4 years, we've moved from 29% to 42%, and we're digging in deeper. I'm asking some people digging deeper as to exactly why we're doing this. But if I was just to say to Ian off your cuff, in special education, what's the factor for that? I believe he would say, and I'll put words in his mouth because we've talked about this today, it's got to the fact that the teachers are teaching all the kids. The teachers are teaching all the kids with their staff, whether it's an EA that's joined them in their complement, or it's a speech and language pathologist, or it's a occupational therapist, etc., that we are really doing a good job. This has garnered a lot of attention in the province as well. And in fact, it's come to that they've asked us how we've been able to do this. And I think that Ian better come up with a good answer, because in the next slide you take a look too at the secondary level. Again, not as significant as the elementary panel, but again you'll see the fact is that on most of the areas that we are outperforming the province. And the perception that the parents have shared with me that somehow this is, I'm not sure how this has gotten in there, but the perception is reality until perception is challenged, and you have the reality that incorporates the truth. The fact that we are above or at the provincial average in almost every single measure that goes through. And if you could move to the OSSLT, and this again, taking a look at this, again, in each and every measure over the last 4 years, we are above the provincial average. And this is data that you can go and get from EQAO. This isn't things that perception that perhaps we might be making or cooking the books. This is just the truth that's out there, and it's as simple as that. If we move to the next one, Lisa, as well. The fact is, the other piece, so with our Board of Education, this Board of Education, until the year that Kennedy took the $10 million away, this board and its legacy boards overspent in special education every single year. We continue to do that, David. And the reason why we overspend, you may remember when you were chair, Kennedy said to us at the time, Minister Kennedy said, you know, you're overrepresented in Eastern Ontario special needs kids, you know, what are you doing? And then within 3 weeks, he came back and took $10 million away from us. We never understood that. As you know, the board made that 11-0 vote saying to me, directing me to spend the money. as we go through. But the fact is, even with that, and thank goodness we made that courageous decision, because we were benchmarked against the $10 million that we spent, and that has actually put us in a situation, through you, Chair Peters, in a very positive way of what we're doing. And again, this next slide may even, if the parents are patient with me as I speak with individual parents, whether they even want to look at these slides. The next one takes a look at something that I think says a great deal about this board, and the fact that we never turn our back on a child. There's not a single child that's ever been in an IPRC or had an IEP stating that they need additional support that we've said you don't get the EA support. In fact, many could argue, and perhaps Associate Director Carswell, that we have used EAs almost as if they're Band-Aids for special education, and they aren't. In fact, you take a look at this, we have been given approximately, you take a look at that, funding of approximately 10 EAs to every 1,000 students over the last 4 years, and continuing to be. We overspend on that particular line because we know in many cases we have to. And finally, return to the next two slides. And again, I'd like to, and I'm not sure if this is particularly exciting to take a look at, but in answering a couple of those questions, we also are down 750 special needs students. So you take a look in 2006, 2007, 2011, we have in special education, we're down 750. You'd expect that you'd have the same decline in your EA use as well. But even there, as you take a look tracking this year, we will be again spending more money on this particular line than the Ministry of Education gets us. Now, I'm also, in the final slide, and thank you, Lisa, I'll make these slides available to the trustees. I know you may be getting phone calls in your home about this from people who really care about their kids. That's why they're phoning you. I don't think they're out after us. They just want to know what's going on. But here's the truth, again, is that the EA wages, the provincial bargaining table that was organized, the provincial interest table, the EAs, and we believed it was correct. And we as a Board of Education felt that many years ago a decision was made to reduce EA hours. At the provincial table, the QP negotiated to reduce their numbers but up their time in schools. And so what you have basically, you have at one point we could buy this many EAs with time, and now with more EAs with longer hours and the same lot of money, you're going to reduce some places. So what you see here on this particular slide is the fact by the end of this collective agreement, you're going to have, in a 5-hour instructional day, you're going to have EAs that will be working 7 hours. And I believe that that reflects the fact that they're doing planning and working with their teachers and working in their schools, but you're going to see a very different. And at the same time, the government doesn't say, well, we've got more money there, as that's going to come out of our lines, it traditionally has. And that piece is just to put out there so that when David, through you, Chair Petersman, when you're in the discussions, these are the facts you're dealing with. They're not pretty, but the fact is that this is the truth as it comes down. What I say right now is probably, at least going back to the very first slide, I think the most powerful part of the first slide I prepared for you is the fact that our special education kids are significantly outperforming the province. And there's probably, if you take a look at this, if I was to take you down to Thousand Island Elementary School to take you to a grade 8 classroom, I could show you a young man who's teaching there who has several fully integrated special needs children in his room, and he, in his instructional practice, he is delivering the program to all the kids. And if he has instructional support from EA, it's done there to support his program, not to support an individual child. And I'd welcome anyone to go take a look. It's perhaps one of the best quote-unquote regular special classrooms you'd ever be in, because I think the teacher there is taking the special out of special education and teaching to them all. The proof is in the pudding, as you take a look at there, is that we are making significant gains for our kids in special education. And actually, I would argue that we're, I say this humbly, probably an example for the entire province. And I would, through you, Chair Peterman, maybe Associate Director Carswell would like to comment on that.
Through Chair Petersman, just I was commenting to Director Thomas. I was in a school earlier this week, and I guess our theory was that we wanted to look at our children as students first, understanding that some of our students have certain needs that need to be met so that they can participate in our school experience. But really, it was a quality learning environment that we were really trying to go after. And I'm really proud of our classroom teachers, in particular, who we really said, you're not to outsource special education needs in your classroom, that you maintain responsibility for those children, and that you're in charge of meeting that need. And it's not that you don't need support to do that. It might be equipment or personnel that you need to do that. And our teachers have really stepped up to the bar. And I really, I couldn't be prouder of our teachers taking on that challenge. And if you walk around the classrooms of Upper Canada, you will see, not special education, you will see students and students learning. Some students will be learning with technology, or may at some point have another pair of hands in the classroom. But it's really gone from being a stand-apart system to being building good learning environments. So when we had our Spec Ed review in 2004, that was the criticism of our system, is that we had Spec Ed was a parallel, separate system that stood apart from the classroom. And so that was the divide that we had to cross. Thanks to the commitment of our staff, I think we've taken great strides. In terms of meeting student needs, and I'm a little cautious about answering that generally, am I meeting special education needs? It depends on that student at that point in time, and needs change over time. Things happen, problems arise, and sometimes problems are mitigated. And so we try and remain nimble and ensure that we supply what it takes to help a child learn. That might be an EA, that might be a special piece of equipment, that might be a change in teaching strategy. It could be any number of things. So it's a dynamic challenge to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our students. But I'm really pleased to see that, particularly with our EQAO results, as one of those measures that our students are continuously improving in their achievement results.
I'm not sure if that's answered your question.
Trustee McAllister?
I defer to.
Can I just
Okay,
follow
go
up to
ahead,
that?
yeah. Oh, sorry, Trustee McDonald. Yeah, go ahead.
So just three things I want to go back over. As it pertains to results, I think that's significant, so that we can, I guess, attribute some, most of that anyway to teachers, perhaps to strategy. There's been a significant change in our strategy over the period of 3 to 4, perhaps 5 years. Technology, greater use of, and new types of technology that have assisted us with that. Getting into the next piece, when I look at safety for students more so than anything, you had a slide that showed us at 14 and now we're down to 12.9. Even though we're at 12.9 per 1,000, and I think you made a comment about the IPRC driving the determination as to whether an EA is involved or not. We're doing well from an achievement standpoint. Students are doing better, but our students, special needs students, safe even with the 12.9. We're not in a situation where we have students who might require an EA for assistance, those types of things. We're in a situation where every student's needs are being addressed based on, I think, what you identified as the IPRC.
Through Chair Peters, but the safety question is a critical question, and that's the reason why we overspend. In that line in the history of this board and its legacy boards has been, if safety is a question, we err on going over on that line. And right now, when we have some kids who are dangerous to themselves, dangerous to others, we would always side on the second pair of hands in the room. But as Associate Director Carswell spoke about, at the same time recognize that often instructional practice, changing the way perhaps you will be teaching, whether this person's in kindergarten or grade 9, that your instructional delivery may play a significant role. What we recognize is that you just can't add another body all the time and think that will solve the problem. Ian's used the term outsourced. If you send a kid down the hall behind the piano to do their schooling, they're down the hall behind their piano. But we have determined that the second pair of hands should be in the classroom, in a safety situation, as you described, working within the curriculum in that particular situation, or in the least restrictive environment. The other piece that we take a look at, and Michael brought it up, one of our areas in safety terms is often not during the traditional classroom time. It's actually in the times of recess or lunch breaks and so forth. And in that particular line, again, this board, as its previous boards, have made significant decisions to go over in our in-school monitors an actual job that this board created when we felt the ministry was not funding that particular level of supervision. And again, that's a big question for us. And I think for Ted, that question of safety and supervision in the non-traditional hours of schooling, either before or after school or during recess lunch hours, is a place we're watching very closely. And Michael, if I was right, we could be potentially right now $500,000 over in that line.
We've added $500,000, approximately.
So, David, we're not going to make the mistake of leaving someone alone who could. Now, the same token, it's a big system with lots of kids' needs, and we have to pay attention. But if we're going to make a mistake, it'll be adding a body, not taking a body away.
And just to further follow up, my third piece that I wanted to address, I think it's your last slide. One of the major concerns I had when we actually were looking at our budget in the summer was knowing that we were looking at potential reductions, but also knowing that this was going to come into play with the increase in hours. So I don't want to sound like I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth. I have a concern over the cost associated with that, even though I have a concern over the safety of students. How are we going to manage this moving forward? Because if we've added 685,000, there's potential that that's going to increase even significantly more in a year or so to come if we continue on a similar path.
The fact is, through you, Chair Petersma, is that this is something it was negotiated at a provincial table. Charlotte, you may want to jump in here too, is that 37% cumulative change in the wages of that particular group was not really done by our board negotiating with CUPE. That was CUPE at the provincial table. Charlotte, can I draw into this? Have I captured that accurately?
Yes, you're correct, Director. It's through the PDT that was established for CUPE employees and educational assistants specifically. So a combination of, as the graph shows, an increase in their hourly wage and also an increase in the hours each day.
So funds will be flowing to accommodate the hours and wages?
It'll come in the lump that we have, and we're going to have to find the money through that lump sum.
Well, it's Jan's. So are you saying there's no additional money coming to cover off the 30-minute increase in their day?
It'll come in the one lump sum that comes towards that particular line.
Rick?
If I may, and if Lisa would go back a slide or two. Next one. What you will see is that the ministry will fund that extra half hour, but at 10 EAs per 1,000 students, not at 12.9 that we currently have. So they will fund at their standard rate at 10 EAs per 1,000. That's what our expectation is, although the numbers haven't been released yet.
Okay. Trustee McAllister?
I'd like to follow up on a question that Trustee McDonald asked with regard to whether or not we were meeting the needs of whether the cost of EAs or the number of EAs were meeting the needs of our students. And you'll have to bear with me on this one because this is uncharted ground for me, and I'm still learning a great deal about this. We have 328 EAs, correct? As a total here? 235 elementary and 93 secondary. And I've heard you, Director Thomas, say that our approach is to supply to the student what the student needs, whether it be an EA or a speech path or behaviorist or whatever. And I couldn't disagree more, frankly, because I was in Thousand Island Elementary School this week, and I saw some of the classes that you referred to. I was also at the Special Education Advisory Committee meeting last night, I mean, and I learned that I won't quote the figure because I don't remember it, but of the number of exceptionalities that we have, that we deal with in this board, the bulk of them are with learning disabilities.
Yes.
As opposed to speech, etc., vision, hearing, whatever. I guess my question is, what portion or what percentage of the assistance to these students is delivered by educational assistants? And I guess that is my question.
I will push through on this one. The piece that we have made the most significant change in the delivery, and why our results are going up in our special needs kids, and why we're so proud of it, is that what Ian has done, and now Susan has followed in, especially with all of our training, is that teacher first, that professional in the room should be setting the tone and standard and setting the direction for all of the kids. That means if you have a learning disabled or communications, or you have an autistic child, or you have a whatever the issues are. And then once that person in a collaboration either with another teacher, or collaboration with their principal, collaboration with their EA, if there is an EA assignment, then we'll be developing the program for all of the students in the room. And what you don't have, and I think an interesting term that Ian's chosen is outsource, is that down the hall you don't send the two kids to work with the EA one-on-one. Now, we still have a lot of that going on, but what we have seen dramatically now is that the teachers who have determined in their schools to teach all, to plan for all, and to be inclusive, they are making significant gains as you take a look at this one. But at the same token, we know we have other kids, as Trustee McDonald is bringing forward. If you have issues of safety and security for yourself and for others, it may have a very different role for an EA. You may have a very different role for your behavioral therapist. And so what we're spending more time on is getting it right for each child specifically. And that the adage, and this is perhaps slangular, the term, this sort of, we'll throw an EA at it. We don't do that anymore. Although, as you can see, we continue to spend more than the rest of the province does on that particular line. What we're learning is that you have to have a sophisticated team response that could use technology. It could involve a different approach, a different style of teaching to a child. It may even involve, for example, I'll give you an example. We had quite a disturbed youngster this year who, at the beginning of the school term, was presenting extreme behavior problems in the classroom that we didn't understand from the previous year. They called the team together, they got together very quickly, and they found out that in the family it had quite a traumatic breakup over the course of the year. Father had just raced off to another country, Mom was there looking after things, and this little guy in grade 4 was angry beyond anger and was interfering with his learning. Not only that, was interfering with the entire class. We brought in an emergency EA. It brought some sort of peace to the situation, but the child wasn't learning because he was being pulled out down the hall in offices. And then together the team sat down and made this decision of how do we connect this little guy to his dad. And through Skype and through the methodology that we have, because our board is robust in our IT, we were able to work out that he could talk to his dad through Skype twice a week at school, on school time. And what was amazing, his behavior dramatically dropped off, and we got the youngster we had in grade 3, not the youngster we now have in grade 4, and he's actually deliberately looking for setting standards for his own behavior because Mom and the teacher said, now listen, you're going to take 30 minutes with your dad on school time. You got to get your things done. And of course, he's a part of the whole deal. And what was at the beginning a very expensive response to a behavior problem has now become a technology issue. And the cost of having our ability to Skype has delivered a really solid program to a little boy who was in distress and to a family that was absolutely stressed out. That's just one example of how we've become more holistic in looking at the needs of not only that boy in that classroom, but the whole family. And I think the mother's happier. I think the family's happier. I'm not sure what Dad's doing. I think the dad must be happier too, I can only imagine.
Yeah, ask a supplementary.
Yeah, go ahead.
I appreciate the holistic approach and the examples, and I have witnessed some of that myself. I still want to ask the question, is the number of students who require an educational assistant proportionate to the number of EAs available to them?
We are handing out the EAs as deliberately as needed in every single situation, looking at every situation singularly by its particular needs, and that's why we're above. That's why we're above the 10 allocation. Why we give out more EAs than any other jurisdiction in the eastern part of the province, and we will. And we are right now from what was, I think we're 16 above now. And will continue to climb as different kids come in and needs have become pronounced in different ways. You have a child who's involved in a car accident, comes back to school 3 months later, total change, you may have to change everything about it. So we'll make every single decision deliberately based upon that child's needs and the family's needs. We don't have a formula that says, sorry, you don't get it, we've already used up all our EAs. We don't do that.
Trustee McPherson?
I was at the SEAC meeting last night, and I think it bears noting that we support more children that are not identified than those that are identified with our classroom supports. That's partly a reflection of our spec ed plan when we revised it, was that we educate the child and not put the focus on education and not on special. I've got some concerns, and these are concerns I've had ever since I became a trustee. I don't believe there's any such a thing as a truly balanced budget. If you meet the financial requirements, there's always going to be this little patch in the wall you've got to crack, and I think, or that you've got to fix. And I think we're doing quite well on that, but we have to bear in mind we're 1% away from a deficit here. Like, we're talking about a $300 million budget and $1.5 million in surplus. So less than 1% either way, and we're either in a surplus or a deficit position. And I have a question about sustainability. I'm looking at these new numbers for salaries and wages. I'm looking at the fact that last year we went through a $2.6 million cut in the high needs amount, and that is what drove our budget that we passed in July. Now we talk another $130,000 out of that line. Like, when is the other shoe going to drop? Like, are we going to continue to get cuts in the high needs line, which is the line in the budget that we specifically hire EA support for our needs students from? And we're now at 12.9. The government ministry will pay us for 10 per 1,000. Can we build sustainability into that? Or are we going to be running around a year from now robbing from Peter to pay Paul?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Essentially, the spec ed funding formula is being reviewed. And if Lisa were to go back a slide, that one, no, that one right there, you'll see that the amount that Trustee McPherson referred to, high needs, and you'll see that in 2009-10 it went down, and again in 2010-11 it declined, and you can see that there's a decrease of over $3 million on that line. Now, at a future time, I will bring to you a list of high needs amount per student. And Upper Canada is one of the higher receiving boards, and that was due to the work done 10 years ago by Colin Vickers and the spec ed team in that day of identifying, and when they were doing the ISA inventory, I think is probably an unfortunate term, but it was an identification of the ISA 2 and 3 needs. And as a result of the work of the spec ed people of that day, we've enjoyed an amount of about $750 per student in high needs amount. If you take a look at Peel, one board that didn't do their homework of that day, their amount is closer to the $350 per student level. And the ministry is now taking a look at how do we rebalance that formula. So spec ed funding will decrease because we're at the top end of the per student funding, and when the dust settles, we will have less available to us, I believe.
Now,
Not the
part of part of your question was based on the, if I understood your question properly, that you were concerned that the changes in the the amount per hours, the number of hours they're working, so the
They're going to pay us
3.5, and the increase of about $5,000, say $4,500 per. You're concerned about whether we have the sustainability to meet
right,
that. But I
because-
think it's important that we remember that our budget, they're going to cover the first 10. It's the 2.9 that we're going to have to worry about, which is, I just wanted to make sure that we understood that it wasn't the full amount.
it's
That it was.
differential.
So it's not. It's a smaller amount than.
Yeah.
Okay, Trustee McCrae.
When you first started talking about Director David Thomas, when you first started talking about your slide presentation, you talked about perception. And I would just like to recommend that the slideshow presentation that you gave this evening and the explanation that you gave this evening, I think a good starting point would be with your SEAC committee in giving that to them. And I would recommend it the very next meeting, because I think that there still is that perception out there, and it's of great concern to a lot of parent associations.
I'll also have the slide deck put in the trustee library too, so that if you wanted to use it as well in school council meetings. Trustee McAllister.
Trustee McPherson has raised an interesting question with regard to a potential shortfall eventually with regard to funding, and it's obviously a reality. But there's an old adage that if you rob Peter to pay Paul, you'll never hear any complaints from Paul. And I guess what I'm suggesting here is that meeting the needs of our students who have special needs and exceptionalities is an indicator of a very civilized, caring, and loving society, and we just have to do it one way or the other.
Trustee McDonald.
Just to follow up on Trustee McCrae's recommendation, I think we're at an opportunity here now to ensure that we get communication back to and from, I guess, more so back. SEAC, we've got some new members on SEAC, so if we want to make a recommendation to SEAC, I would like to get the feedback from SEAC back to here. Not to say that the trustees won't do that, but let's see what the formal committee has to say, so that we can then react to it or at least discuss it. So I'd like to formally second your motion, I guess, if you want to make the motion and get the response back from SEAC, if that's what you want to do.
Well, we can. I don't know. Do you want a motion, or are you comfortable taking it forward?
I think I can. I think with that, if you were to say, Director, we're telling you to go to SEAC to make a presentation on the budget with Rick, I think it's very appropriate.
Is everybody okay with that, or do you want a recommendation?
Well, we're doing orientation at the next meeting, so maybe this would be an opportunity to slide this in as part of that orientation. You're talking of these 5 or 6 short slides here. You're not talking the entire budget presentation. So you could slide that into the orientation.
Trustee McMillan?
Can I just comment on that?
Oh, sure. Just go back to Trustee McDonald.
I don't want to force administration to do something, I guess, against their will. It's more so, I believe they'll do it. I just think that if we have a direct response to SEAC or a direct motion to SEAC, say we want your input back. It's not so much receive it, thanks very much, and we move on. I want to ensure that we can kind of create a new line of communication with SEAC. We've got some new members on there, and this may be an opportunity that we at least open that door to have some of that communication come back.
So the recommendation is that we want this presentation on the slide deck. What are you calling it?
I just call it revised special
education. Be presented to SEAC, and their response and feedback be communicated back to the board.
I want that piece to come back, and maybe our representatives can ensure that happens. But I want to ensure that we actually have some feedback from SEAC on it. Not
All
so
right.
much that they received it.
you
What are their thoughts?
Do you have specific questions that you would, I would say you need to ask them specifically what you want. Like just in feedback, they may not give you what you're looking for. I would say if you're looking for a specific, like,
Well, I mean, I can have questions, but I think there's 10 or 11 of us here that may have questions that SEAC might want to answer. I'm more interested in making sure that, yes, they receive it, but do they have any negative concerns or any concerns over what's being presented? Are they satisfied with the level of service that's being provided? I know I am, based on the information from Director Thomas, but I want to ensure that the communication gets back to us. That's the missing link that we've had in the past, is that in a SEAC report, we know that something's being presented, we just don't get the communication level coming back. And SEAC, in my view, and the intention of it is to be an advisory committee to the board, we're not getting any advice or comments on a regular basis.
Okay. There's no opposition to that request to administration, is there?
No.
Okay. Is it specifically dealing with this? Quickly then.
It's just to facilitate what Trustee McDonald is suggesting here. May I suggest that the slides be sent to SEAC, or obviously Trustee McCrae, who is the designate, will be dealing with this and bringing them forward to SEAC. But may I suggest that each slide be accompanied by areas of discussion proposed by our staff?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's a really good point, Trustee McAllister, because I put these together in response to, I'll give you an example, phone call. I'm very happy with what's happening at my school, but I've been told by someone, that we don't have enough going, And when I turned back to them, I said, well, actually, we've spent over $2.9 million above the budget there. We are the board that spends the most on this in Eastern Ontario, one of the most in the province. They're very surprised with this, but they're just phoning me to. And what I'm going back to, as I said to Trustee McCrae, is to reality is what you have until it's challenged properly. Then you have a new reality as you go through. And I don't think some people have seen this data or are paying much attention to it as you go through. So I'd be more than prepared, but I agree with you, Trustee McAllister. I think the discussion after each slide is probably what Trustee McDonald wants to hear.
Trustee McMillan?
Well, first I'd like to compliment the special education students that who have received the supports that gives us the test scores that we have. But there's no question that overspending is part of the reason that we have done that. The other thing that I want to comment on is Trustee McPherson's comment about all students are benefiting from the support in the classroom. And if our goal is to get all of our students across the line, we cannot cut back on that support. Yes, we need them, and we need our support staff for high-need students, but we certainly need them for all of our students. And the third thing is, there are some wonderful things happening in the classroom with the teachers who are providing a learning environment that is open and inviting for all students to learn. But that's not happening everywhere, and it's not happening in both panels. It's happening more so in the elementary panel and less in the high school panel. I think that's just a given. But because of that, I think we cannot cut back on overspending in this area. It's something the public has come to, when they do find out that we've been overspending, are going to say, great, continue to overspend, because they're not going to be happy if we try to cut back. And as Trustee McPherson said, we're going to have to rob Peter to pay Paul. Until the government can get online with us, I suggest we continue to rob Peter to pay Paul to get all of our students across the line.
All right, thank you, Trustee McMillan. Trustee Castle?
Just a few comments. Going back to what Trustee McPherson said, I don't think that his comment was adequately responded to when he was asking. I think what he was trying to ask was, how are we going to continue this level of support for our special needs students if we're continuing to overspend on this budget? I haven't heard of this before, where we're continuously saying every single year that we're going to spend more than what we have, and I find it hard to believe that we're going to continue to overspend and then say that in 10 years from now that we're going to be able to deliver the same level of service that we're having now. I think that if we're spending more than we have right now, we'll have less to spend in the future for our special needs students. And I think that parents and students may be happy with the support that they have now, but especially when we're looking at a foreseeable decrease in the amount that we'll be receiving, I think it would be wise for us to look at reducing that budget item now, even though it's a nice thing to say that we need to, to support everyone as much as possible. If it's not financially possible, according to the data, especially when we're looking at more EAs with higher wages working longer hours on less money, it just doesn't make sense to me. And I think that Trustee McPherson's comment needs to be readdressed, where he's asking, where's the money going to come from 10 years from now?
Superintendent Gales, do you have a response to, why don't you talk more about what you're doing to plan for sustainability in our ability to deliver the necessary programs to special education students? Or maybe that's a better question for Superintendent Carswell or yourself.
First of all, the legacy boards and this board has overspent, and what they've spent it against are roofs, ceilings, new facilities. We knew perhaps that we should expand a gym or do something, and we put those things off, and we've invested in people. That's what the legacy boards did. Lanark brought in a whole bunch of poor roofs. Prescott Russell had issues with that because they always spent their money on kids. And so what will happen is that we will probably do the same, because that's what boards do. They say maybe the Tooth Fairy will deliver money for capital, and we hope we get it. The fact is that there will be, Trustee Castleman, there's going to be a hard-hitting time, because right now we're sitting on over $500 million in repairs we have to make to our schools. But again, we will never, and we've not done this, as Trustee McCullough said, we have never turned our back on a difficult situation with a child in need. What we have to do, from my perspective, and this board has taken it on the last 4 or 5 years, is that we have to continue to position the issues of education as not only central to a healthy community, but to a healthy economy. I'm not the politician, but if you take a look right now, the thriving countries in the world have had an agenda of well-funded public education. South Korea, Finland, each of these countries per capita is spending a great deal of money on its students. We have to continue to hope that enlightened policy decision makers at the federal and provincial level will put a premium on public education, and they won't allow our buildings to get to such decay that we have to do those things. But what I believe will happen, from my perspective of being in this business quite a long time, is that we will put off a boiler, we will put off an asphalting in some place and say that perhaps should be directed to the classroom. I think we're into right now, Trustee Castleman, I think we're in for some tough times where we're going to be making those decisions we made about 10 and 15 years ago about what's first. And what we're going to do is we're going to be putting Band-Aids over boilers and different things, because we will, I think, a legacy of this board will be put the kids first. I'm not sure if I've answered your question or Trustee McPherson's question accurately, but I think that's where the sustainability will come from.
Well, I think that, part of the answer, too, is conversations like this, Trustee Castleman, and the ongoing conversations that we have every year around the budget. That's a struggle. But it reminds me of, if I can just deliver a short anecdote, I was at an OPSPA conference, and Liz Sandals, who was then assistant to Minister Wynne, was leading a group of trustees on a discussion about the budget. And I remember it was a rather obscure logic she was using, but she had this graph up, and she came and she was talking about the various numbers and what she thought of them, and she came to the part on capital, whereas Director Thomas says is often where we go to pinch some of the money to cover off some of these other expenditures. And she came up to one of the lines and she said, well, and we know that we give X hundreds of millions of dollars to boards, but they only spend a half of this on actual repairing schools. So we're drawing from that you only need this much to keep your schools repaired. obviously stating that they were going to go into that line and remove the amount. So, it's kind of it was curious logic at the time, and we all kind of thought she must know the truth because she was a trustee at one time. That's what we were doing, but it kind of invites that maybe someday they might actually come and do that. Now, where am I? I'm with Trustee McPherson.
Not a question really, just a request that this be sent to all trustees.
It'll be in the library
Yeah.
as soon as I get it.
Okay, just that not only at SEAC, but there is a void out there of information. I know I'm getting ready to start my journeys through my municipal councils, and that is one of the questions that invariably comes up. And certainly information I will take with me.
All right, I think. Oh, Trustee McCray, sorry.
And just to wrap this all up, tonight we talked a lot about money, but I'll never forget at the last meeting where Jeff McMillan brought up the point about a magical situation happening in a classroom. And I just think that there's a lot of magic happening out there, and we need to get better at sharing that magic. And I'm talking from ward to ward, school to school, classroom to classroom, and student to student. And those magical situations that are happening out there, there's got to be another situation that's similar to that, where the teachers and the resources there can share that with other schools, and it has a spin-off, and then it goes to another school. I'm not saying that we don't need the money. Of course we need the money, but we also have to just get better at sharing those magical situations in our classrooms. And I just wanted to finish with that.
And, go ahead. We actually, Trustee McCray, have several avenues to do that, and we're actually quite pleased. Right now, through the hard work of our program department, our hubs and nodes, which I think that Associate Director Carswell, you should invite our trustees to come and see that particular sharing, the magic that Trustee McCray is talking about. The other piece we have is that we have created situations with professional learning groups where outside of schools, for example, where they share other schools with other schools. For example, at our Tate McKenzie to set up a professional learning group with Naismith down the road, and having the principals collaborate, and that's going on right now, and having those dynamic discussions. The last one that's proving that is serving this board effectively, and I know it's controversial with some, when we have our small school summit, we will have our very best practitioners presenting to other practitioners the very best and up-to-date information. And you'll see, particularly at the secondary panel, with our high skill majors, a presentation by a group of teachers from Athens. And we have a fabulous one that went on right now. It's a business music combination course that you're going to get a business credit and a music credit. In this one, designed by a teacher who's absolutely engaging, and he's already sharing this with Tugwa, he's sharing this with Charlotte, sharing this with Seaway to other teachers, like-minded teachers, a really interesting program to engage kids in relevant learning. And we've been using that as an opportunity to sort of put people together who are going to share, as you called it, magical moments, and this could happen in your place as well. And I think the other piece that we're doing, and I'm very proud of as we go through, our board's ability technologically with all of the things you see around in here, particularly the web-based, is that we're sharing very, very quickly really good ideas. You could have something like tonight at Van Cleek Hill. We have 7 principals meeting with Jeff Campbell to talk about how do we do what they've done at BCI at North Grenville. They've traveled up there with parents and key staff members to say, how can we do this? So some of it's just old-fashioned, you put 25 people on the bus and they're welcomed at BCI, but you've got to have the will to do it. What I'm pleased with, I'm very proud of, they have the will to do it. So thank you.
Okay.
No further comments? Okay, we'll move on now to our next item, which is a review of travel and reimbursement policy. This item was added to the agenda at the request of Trustee McAllister, and I'm going to turn the floor over to him.
Thank you, Chair. It just In reviewing the travel, hospitality, and expense reimbursement policy, it struck me that there was a lack of mention of the option for carpooling. It would appear to me that where two or more people traveling together, that would decrease our carbon footprint, aid the environment, and it would also model desired behavior. And finally, there is a potential cost saving. And for example, a trip of 200 kilometers at 46 cents a kilometer is $92. If that same trip was carpooled and paid at the rate of, say, 60 cents for two or more people, that cost would be $120, which is a saving of $28 if there's one extra person. If there were two extra people, it would be a saving of $56 and $74 if there were three people involved. I just think that our travel policy should have that option and provision for our employees as well as our trustees. So it's just an idea that I suggest we consider.
Okay, are there any other comments? Trustee Castleman?
So I had made I was looking at this earlier, and this was the exact same thing that federal politicians were dinged on when the Auditor General did a report, and they revealed that the personal expense claims were out of control at the federal level. And it was revealed to me at the last OSSA meeting I attended in November, and in teleconferences after that, that other boards have policies in place that limit the amount of expenses that trustees can claim on personal development and travel and meal expenses. So, for example, someone said, I have, $50 for dinner tonight. Can't spend more than that. And I think that having trustees held to a certain budget, I think, would be wise, because in the policy 445, it's very vague when it comes to expenses and how much trustees should spend, and there really isn't any anything that holds them to spending within a certain amount, and I think that should be something that the finance department should look at.
Are there any comments on Trustee McAllister's idea? Go ahead.
On his, I'm totally in favor of giving a rate that's better for people that travel, to promote carpooling. And it's going to save the board money, so I think it's kind of a win-win for everybody, the environment and the people that carpool.
Now, Superintendent Gales, when we were looking at how to go about setting the rate, one of the things we looked at is potential tax implications of the rate, and we tied it to the Revenue Canada rate. For what reason?
If I may, the CRA looks at a rate and determines whether it's reasonable in the circumstances. And so we have tied ourselves to the government rate based on the fact that if they consider it reasonable, then it should be reasonable for our circumstances. Now, if you look at the various different rates created by CAA, you could justify two different numbers, but they would both probably be lower than that government rate. And it seems to be the maximum at this point. I would suggest that anything above that rate would probably have, it could potentially leave you open for consideration, audit by Revenue Canada, by CRA, and determination that those were taxable amounts.
So the recipient would, of the 60 odd cents, would have to pay tax, could end up having to pay tax on the difference, potentially.
Potentially.
All right, Trustee McAllister, you want to add something back in?
You probably know more than I do, Mr. Gales, about this, but I question that because I know of many organizations that do have a split rate to accommodate carpooling, and if it is an issue, then I suggest we seek direction from Canada Revenue on this issue, just to make sure that we are taking steps in the right direction.
Trustee McPherson?
I question the need for a dual rate. Trustee Richards and I have carpooled fairly consistently for about the last 7 years. And there's never been a financial incentive to do it. If I go a few kilometers out of my way to pick her up, or she goes out of her way to pick me up, that reflects in our mileage claim. I question whether it costs me any more money to two people in my truck than one. Why should I get an extra 20 cents just because I've got a second person in the cab with me? So I think what we need to do is simply state that we encourage carpooling where convenient, but we continue to pay you at the rate that we've agreed to. I don't see the need to use an incentive to encourage it.
Trustee McAllister, do you want to?
Frankly, I think the point is being missed here, in that it is not always, it may be known in your case that you are coming to the same meeting with another trustee and can carpool. But I guess I'm looking at the larger picture, which includes all our employees, not just trustees, where that might be more applicable.
So maybe, if I might suggest, Trustee McAllister, that rather than pick the solution or the incentive, maybe we could ask administration to look at the issue, do a little digging on what other, you said you had some other ideas, see what they're doing, and then maybe we could come up with other options too that might help achieve the goal, which is to reduce our carbon imprint, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
So I put that on the floor as well for discussion. Now, where else? I think I saw somebody over here. Trustee Buckland, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Trustee McPherson, that we do encourage carpooling. Times we come with 3 as trustees and from the Cornwall area. And I know that at the school level that these carpooling is encouraged, and I've often heard teachers saying, well, who's, we're going to this PD thing, and who's going to do the driving and so on. So I think that the volunteer incentive is what we need, and then to say, well, this is the saving we're making. Now we're going to make 1/3 less saving, but we're going to have carpooling. I don't quite follow the logic on that proposal.
Trustee McAllister, because I don't want to lose what I think is the core point, which is to look at putting something in the travel policy to help or to encourage. I mean, I think that you're right. There's nothing in it, and I think there could be something in there that we encourage. But if you were to go with the idea that let's look at potential solutions rather than offering up the solution, I don't know. Are trustees? I can just ask. Are trustees in favor of looking at ways that we could encourage? Are you against that, Trustee McPherson?
No, I'm over here. He's over there.
Sorry, Trustee Buckland?
I think we should have a report from
Okay,
staff.
so everybody's in favor of that. So is that okay with you then?
Yes.
All right. So we're looking at potential changes to the policy, travel policy, to encourage carpool.
Could we also examine the pitfalls? Like, you have, 5,000 employees?
A lot.
How do you correlate that the 112 people that attended this conference here actually carpooled with who they said they carpooled with?
I think, though, that then you run into, one of the comments I'd make to Trustee Castleman is that we have character values, and we hope that all people don't need to have rigid rules in order to do the right thing. Anyway, Trustee McDonald.
I mean, I think we're getting into a rat hole here about what we want to achieve, and If our main motivation is to reduce our carbon footprint, I'm not certain that putting an incentive for carpooling is really there. I mean, are we going to get to the extent that we're encouraging people to buy 4-cylinder vehicles or hybrid vehicles or those kinds of things? I don't know that that's what we want to do as a board. I think our motivation should be that we want to reduce travel expenses. If an offset of that is a reduction in carbon footprint, perfect. But by reducing the travel expenses board-wide, that's more money that we can put into student needs or facilities or whatever. I mean, if carbon footprint is what we want to discuss, okay, I'm not necessarily certain that I want to discuss that and make an achievement result for kids. I get that we have to be proper stewards of our space, but I think we're here to ensure that we get significant gains for students. That's our main function as trustees. You know, we can put some things in place, but incentives like this, I don't necessarily think that we're getting to the bottom line of improving student outcomes.
I'm going to come back to you, Trustee McAllister. Trustee McRae?
Well, I don't think we have anything to lose by doing an investigation. We have nothing to lose from that and everything to gain. It may bring up some points that none of us have even thought of. So I'm in support of there being some research done on this area, and then at that point in time we can decide where we're going to go from there. But really we're talking about something that I don't think we all have a lot of information on and to base a decision on. So let's get the information and then make an informed decision.
Trustee Carpenter?
I might be out of line here, and you can stop me if you wish, but I would like to see this whole policy reviewed. There's nothing in that policy that really shows that we are being fiscally responsible to our taxpayers and to our public and to our parents, and I think I'd like to see it all looked at again. I might be out of line here because it came forward as a travel motion, but...
Well, we're a little out of germane right now, so I would request that we stay within the topic that Trustee McAllister brought forward. Trustee McAllister?
Thank you. I believe Trustee McRae has summed it up very well. Thank you.
Trustee McPherson?
Actually, when you read the policy, it doesn't even mention the word automobile. It's when you get into the procedures accompanying the policies. And they were last revised as of May of 2009, and procedure is an administrative thing. Maybe what will come out of this is a line in the procedure that will do something to encourage carpooling. But if you read the policy, it's pretty open, let's put it that way. And
go ahead.
In our strategic plan, Ron Cottenham is chairing and championing a look at the whole aspect of greening, and they have a committee that is looking at all of our organization, not only for saving money, because when you save money, often that is a greening effect as well, but they're looking at the impact of doing PD differently by doing it electronically. They're looking at meetings that can be held electronically, and there's a variety of things, and I think it would be very appropriate to have a report that would answer the questions that Trustee McAllister's asked, combine that asking Rick to perhaps to take a look at the best practice, and then ask Ron perhaps make an interim report on where we're moving with the whole aspect of our greening procedures, because it's quite complex, and it's looking at that. So it would make a great deal of sense to marry this with work that people are already doing.
Okay, encouraging carpooling. I'm just working on a motion here. Unless somebody else has one person. To remove. Okay, so correct me, Trustee McAllister and others in support if I haven't captured what we're looking at. Committee of the Whole requested administration prepare a report outlining potential ways of encouraging carpooling with the goal of reducing our carbon footprint. And I think that that gives you the latitude that if you want to choose to run it through that committee, that gives them the latitude to do that. We don't have, it's always a good idea to give some sense of when we would like a report back. Report to, have I got caption? Okay, report to committee of the whole. When would be reasonable?
I'd like to send it to management council so that we can travel it and dock at the right time.
Okay. All right, then I won't, but the report will be to committee of the whole.
Yeah.
In February?
Not that fast. It will be to committee of the whole. I don't think we can do it that fast. If you're comfortable, if you want, you can assign a date to it, Trustee McAllister. What the director is asking that you allow management council to come up with to schedule it and give the director an opportunity to talk to Ron.
Would March be reasonable then?
I think so. And in fact, I'd like to get it to the senior table and then get it back to this table.
Well, we can always change the date. So let's say, let's be more general and say within the spring of 2011.
I believe
we'll try to push it faster.
I think you're going to have it here for March.
Okay, anybody want to speak to that motion? Trustee McPherson.
I would just like to recommend a friendly amendment. I hope it's friendly. When you talk about carpooling, I'm going to ask that we put in other efficiencies as well. It could mean that somebody will pick up the phone instead of doing a face-to-face meeting. It could be that they will connect by internet. There's all kinds of capacity out there to reduce travel.
I think, though, that, to be honest, I think if I understand, I don't think that what Trustee McAllister is talking about precludes what Trustee McDonald is saying or you're saying. Okay. He's talking in the specific time when you need to drive that we look at ways of encouraging carpooling.
As long as you don't make me give up my truck.
No, it's your choice. Any other comments or questions on that?
Just for the record, staff are encouraged already to travel that way. And when we give out the money to schools to send people to, they're encouraged to fill their car with the appropriate safety level. And we have principals and teachers who will rent vans to put 10 or so people in. In fact, we have traveled the senior team to Toronto. Not only the carbon footprint, but to save the board money. That is, and I think something that we always do, just so that the trustees are aware of that.
Trustee McDonald.
So having said that, if that's the practice, we potentially will see an increase in our expenditures if we adopt a policy such as this.
Why?
Because right now we're paying them $46.
No. Trustee McDonald, the motion right now, I mean, I suppose that they come back and say that we can, but I think we're asking them. We're asking administration to look at it and decide. There's nothing in here that states that it needs to be a financial incentive. We might find that just the principal stating or it being included in communication or just it may be something else that encourages it.
I understand. I understand that, but we seem to have that practice in place already. So, and I've said this many times. We are going to ask administration to go back and do something. If it's a practice that's already being undertaken, we're asking staff to put time and resources to something that's already being done, which in turn costs us money. So the time and energy they put to generate this report, give us the information that we sit here and decide, it's already done, thanks very much, we'll move forward. It's time and energy that we can use them somewhere else. That's all I get at, is that if we're already doing this, what do we need a motion to have information come back and tell us we're already doing it? We already received that tonight.
Well, I think that no, I don't need to defend that. Anybody else have a comment? Trustee McPherson? Trustee McAllister?
The only comment I have with regard to that is if it is practice, fine, but if it's not, it should be. And I think it belongs in a travel policy.
Okay. The motion that I have moved by Trustee McAllister that the Committee of the Whole requests administration prepare a report outlining potential ways of encouraging carpooling with a goal of reducing our carbon footprint. Report will be to Committee of the Whole in spring of 2011. Seconded by Trustee McMillan. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. Okay, thank you. Now move on to the next item, which is board memberships. This is an annual item as required by our bylaws to review our board memberships. Currently, we have two. We're a member of the Ontario Public School Boards Association, and I don't know the name of the student association, Matt.
Ontario Student Trustees.
Okay. The cost of OPSPA is driven by the number of students. So although we can state, is this last year's number?
This was expensive this year.
Okay, so this was the number that we were billed for this year, and it changes every year and declines as the student population declines. $61,344. The Student Association is calculated the same way, or is it different?
It's $500, and then there's a certain rate times how many students we have. on board,
Okay,
so
and
it'll
that
fluctuate.
currently is $1,325. Just to give you a little bit of context, this would be the second year that we've been part of the Student Association. We had kind of ridden on their coattails in the past, and so we just started to become a member. You have received various information on the organization in your agenda. So we have representatives or past representatives of those organizations here. So if you have any questions, or if you want to ask the value of these organizations for administration purposes, this is the time to do it. Okay, seeing Trustee McPherson.
No, I just admit I'm not a fan of OPSPA, but I move that we join these
I
associations.
think there's something in the rules of order that's not really quite appropriate.
No, I know, but
Okay. Is there anybody who's opposed to these board memberships? If not, then I'm just going to move this motion forward to the board. Is anybody opposed? Okay, so we'll move this recommendation on then to the Upper Canada District School Board to renew the memberships for 2011-2012. No, it's just done as consensus.
Excuse me, Chair. Point of
Yep.
order. This is an expenditure of funds. Should it not be done by motion?
It will be done by motion. Just to give you some context, the Committee of the Whole recommends to the board, and the board takes the action.
All right.
Typically, when we operate the Committee of the Whole, if there is no opposition, unlike the last motion where I detected that there was some opposition, so I did form a motion. This time, I'm not detecting any, so in the past, what we've done is just done it on the basis of consensus and moved it forward.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
All right, now down to no items, right? That's it. We're done. So, motion to adjourn. Trustee McMillan, Trustee McDonald, all in favor? Opposed? That carries. Great. We'll see you in 2 weeks for the board meeting.
I just,
Trustee McRae, just can I hang on 1 second, please?
it's just that we have these, all these workshops and things coming up,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just wondering what kind of an impact that's going to have on the next board meeting on January the 26th.
Well,
I will not be there.
we're hoping that those that will either be traveling that are going down early will be able to join by phone. So we've had some indication that some of those members are, and I think Lisa and I did a quick count, and I think we're okay.
Okay, because I'm the 26th workshops I'm at start at 7 o'clock.
Is there a reason why we haven't looked at the items under E, the monthly information updates?
Now, those are presented for information if you want, and so that we've typically not gone through those items. They're just offered for information.
I beg your pardon?
Go ahead, Trustee McDonald.
I mean, if there's a specific item in the information that you wanted to discuss, typically you would just, at the agenda approval stage, just ask to have that brought up, and then it would become an item on the action list, or whatever we call it.
Okay, in light of the fact that this is one of your first Committee of the Whole, Is everybody okay if we just pretend that we didn't do the adjournment yet? And allow Trustee McAllister to ask his question?
Unless we're seeing the staff as well.
I'm not, yes, I understand
See you
that.
pack it up down
All
there.
right. Trustee McAllister, you go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you for allowing me to delay your departure. I'm looking at the monthly facilities report, and I spoke to Jeremy just earlier. He has indicated to me that this is more of an operational type of information. What I'm asking for myself, for Ward 4, and I'm sure all of you, my colleagues on the board, would appreciate this as well, is maybe a similar report with regard to capital projects that are in the offing.
Yeah.
I'm not asking what's happening or
No.
if they're happening now. I just would like to be able to be apprised and apprise my school councils and principals of
Sure.
what's going on.
And then you had made that request before, and we're actually working on changing the report to include that information as well. We were just giving Jeremy time to just redo the report and come up with a format. So you will be receiving that, but it may take another month or two.
Thank you
Okay?
for your indulgence.
I believe that we had a target date of Committee of the Whole March. Is that correct?
Okay with that.
Something along that lines.
Is that the facilities report?
Just the facilities report, which now lists the smaller projects that we do. The updates will then include just a general update on, say, the North Grenville.
Okay.
Just the oldest.
And projects of that size. Yeah, ongoing projects, that's right. All right, so now we're adjourned. Thanks very much.